Welcome to Cozy Love Stories. In today's story, we follow Leona Brown, who's fighting to keep the Chevalier House Bed and Breakfast alive. Bookings are down, the bank keeps calling, and the only thing guests want to talk about is the B&B's famed Lady in Blue ghost. When a charming YouTuber arrives to film the legend, he uncovers something Leona never expected, a real history behind the myth, and a real connection between them. So I invite you to settle in, let the world slow down, and enjoy today's story, Mystery of the Lady in Blue. Chapter 1. The letter from the bank was the third this month, and Leona Brown didn't need to open it to know what it said. She stood in the entryway of the Chevalier House Bed and Breakfast, envelope in hand, weighing whether this would be the one that finally broke her. It had been 2 years since she took over her family's bed and breakfast, and she was drowning. Her gloomy thoughts were interrupted by her best friend Caroline's voice, rising sharply from the front desk. "Toby, I'm not asking you again. You need to get those spare chairs out of the basement for the dinner party tomorrow." Toby shifted from one foot to the other. "I don't want to go down there. The blue lady might show up." Caroline folded her arms. "For the last time, it's the lady in blue. And besides, you're a grown man, Toby. You're too old to believe in ghost stories." "Dude, just because you don't believe in ghosts doesn't make them any less real," Toby muttered. Leona stepped in before Caroline snapped again. "Caroline's right, Toby. It's just a silly story." The words came out sharper than she intended. She'd once believed in that story with all her heart, had dressed as the Lady in Blue for Halloween, helped her mother bake ghost-shaped cookies for guests, until a high school research project shattered those childhood dreams. Isabelle Chevalier, famed ghost of the Chevalier House Bed and Breakfast, had never existed. Leona softened her tone. "But if it makes you feel better, Toby, according to the legend, she only haunts her own room and only on Halloween." Toby opened his mouth to reply when the lead housekeeper, Agatha, strode in and cut him off. "How many rooms?" she barked. Agatha had worked at the Chevalier House since Leona was 11, her fading red hair and sharp tongue as much a fixture of the B&B as the wrought iron gates out front. Caroline rolled her eyes. "Good morning to you too, Agatha. We've got 4 checking out today." Agatha nodded brusquely and marched off toward the back. Toby stared after her. "Why is she here? Isn't Flora scheduled?" "Flora called in sick," Leona said, pulling her laptop closer. The kitchen door swung open, and the B&B's cook, Barry, leaned out. "Was that Agatha I heard? Where's that red-headed beauty gone off to?" he asked. "Flora's sick and she's covering," Toby called back. "Hey, Barry, did you catch the game last night?" Caroline made an exasperated noise. "Focus, Toby. Basement. Chairs. Go." Leona shot her a look. "How about throwing a please in there, for good measure?" Caroline huffed. "Fine. Please, Toby. Go." Barry disappeared into the kitchen again as Toby slouched off toward the basement. Leona turned to Caroline. "You can't keep treating Toby like you did in college. We're professionals now." Caroline sighed. "I know, I'll try. It's just, I still think it was a mistake hiring him. Why bring on someone who got kicked out of school for cheating?" It was a conversation she and Leona had had many times before. "Everyone makes mistakes," Leona said. "Easy for you to say when you weren't the one in trouble because he copied your work," Caroline retorted. Leona winced at the reminder. Caroline, Leona, and Toby had all gone to college together until Toby had been caught cheating with one of Caroline's old research papers. The school had suspected her of helping him, and she'd nearly been put on academic probation. He'd been down on his luck until Leona had taken over the family business and taken a chance on him. That was before Caroline started working at the B&B as the office manager. And while her best friend wasn't happy with having Toby for a coworker, even she had to admit his work was top quality. "Caroline, he's apologized so many times, and he hasn't caused a single problem since I hired him. I think he's proven himself." Caroline held up her hands. "All right, I'll back off. But as your office manager and your friend, I have to say you give people way too much credit, Leona." Leona didn't have a chance to respond. A guest entered the lobby, smiling at the smell of breakfast. For the next hour, Leona ferried dishes from the kitchen to the dining room and back again. The frittata disappeared in generous slices. The potatoes tossed with rosemary and garlic were replenished twice. Toast was spread with apple butter and pumpkin spice cream cheese. Guests ate, chatted, and asked questions about tours and events. Leona smiled through it all, though her mind strayed elsewhere. Once the breakfast service was done and Leona was back in the office, her mood soured. She'd finally read the letter from the bank, her throat tightening as she did. The numbers weren't improving. She'd spent 2 years running the Chevalier House her way. Growing up, her father had weaseled the Lady in Blue ghost story into as much of the B&B as he could. Christmas and Valentine's Day featured tragic stories about Isabel's escapades with her doomed love, Thomas Hale. Even 4th of July was rebranded as Red, White, and Lady in Blue Day. When Leona took over, she stopped using ghost stories in her advertising and instead focused on the house's charm and the history of New Orleans to entice guests. But the bookings had dwindled as the B&B's clientele shifted from ghost hunters to those looking for a more traditional bed and breakfast experience. In an attempt to attract more visitors, Leona had decided to renovate, but the remodel had gone far from smoothly. Timelines lagged and costs overrun, setting her much deeper in the hole than she'd ever imagined. With the bank breathing down her neck, she did the unthinkable and staged her own sighting of the Lady in Blue. She filmed blue light emanating through Isabel's famous 3rd-floor window, just like her father once had. It was a cheap trick, but it worked. October was fully booked, and to drum up more excitement, she was hosting a number of ticketed events at the B&B. If all went well, she'd have enough extra revenue to prove to the bank that she could turn the business back around. She pushed the bank's letter aside and turned her focus to preparations. The murder mystery dinner was scheduled for tomorrow. The Lady in Blue's last Valentine had 20 guests RSVP'd. Barry had insisted on cooking. Toby would serve drinks. Caroline had volunteered to be the MC, and Leona and Flora would be the servers. Caroline gathered her purse as evening came. "You need anything before I go?" "No, just one more guest to check in," Leona said. "Some guy named Dennis Kennedy." Not long after, the front door swung open. A handsome man with warm eyes and a crooked grin stepped inside. Leona didn't need to force the smile that brightened her face at the sight of him. "Welcome to Chevalier House. You must be Mr. Kennedy." "Guilty, but please, just call me Dennis." She handed him his keys and explained the basics. Breakfast times, Wi-Fi access, the on-call number, and when to check out at the end of his stay. He accepted it all with easy charm, but unlike her other guests checking in, didn't leave. "The brochure mentioned ghost tours and Lady in Blue events. Could you tell me more?" he asked. Leona's stomach sank. Another ghost hunter, of course. His face suddenly looked much less charming. She recited the obligatory details about themed events the B&B was putting on, along with some local tours she could recommend. But once again, he didn't leave. "Anything else I can help you with?" she asked. "No, I mean, yes. Have you ever heard of After Dark Archives? It's a YouTube channel." "Can't say I have. Why?" she asked. "Well, because it's mine," Dennis said, smiling sheepishly. I'd like to do an episode on the Lady in Blue. Would you be willing to sit down for an interview? Leona's smile stiffened. Why did it always come down to the Lady in Blue? She wanted her guests to see the beautiful home she loved, not just a backdrop for a campfire tale. She used all her willpower to keep her tight smile plastered to her face. Chapter 2. Dennis settled into his room, his thoughts still circling back to Leona, the pretty proprietor who had checked him in. Irritation had seeped into her expression for a moment when he'd asked to interview her. Botched interviews were not something he could afford right now. The hour-plus drive from Baton Rouge should have left him tired, but instead his mind buzzed with worries about the video he needed to make. Without a strong angle, the Lady in Blue episode might sink into the sea of other ghost stories online. He opened his laptop and went straight to his inbox. An unread message from a sponsor caught his eye. He clicked it open, only for his excitement to crash into disappointment. Another rejection. They liked his channel, but his numbers weren't strong enough for a partnership yet. Dennis leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. When After Dark Archives got monetized, things had been looking so rosy. He quit his job, threw himself into research and filming, but the growth had been slower than he imagined. The money trickling in each month covered some bills, but not all. His savings were dwindling fast. If he didn't land more viewers and sponsors soon, he'd have no choice but to crawl back to a 9-to-5. The next morning, Dennis lingered in the dining room, hoping to catch Leona during breakfast service. At first, he thought she might pause long enough for a word, but she was too busy ferrying dishes back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room, smiling politely at guests while keeping her eyes firmly away from him. When the last of the plates had been cleared, she vanished straight into her office without so much as a glance in his direction. So much for that, he thought. She was clearly avoiding him. He'd have to try his luck later, though. For now, Dennis needed to film B-roll. Trying not to dwell on Leona's cold shoulder, he grabbed his gear and drove into town. Dennis needed to get at least 3 videos out of this week-long trip to New Orleans in order to justify the expense. On top of the episode on the Lady in Blue, he was also covering the pirate, Jean Lafitte, and the casket girls tied to vampire legends. Camera perched on his shoulder, Dennis walked around town, catching sweeping shots of iron balconies, faded plaster walls, and the bustle of the French market. While the lens was still rolling, he spied a familiar face. The B&B's office manager, Caroline, he thought her name was, emerged from a shop and headed toward a shiny red BMW. If Leona wouldn't give him an interview, maybe Caroline might. Dennis quickened his pace, hoping to catch her, but before he could, she slid into the driver's seat and pulled away. Following the missed encounter, Dennis made his way to an afternoon meeting with a tour guide who ran pirate-themed walking tours, but the interview turned out to be a dud. Discouragement leached into Dennis as he drove to the B&B. Back in his room, he half-heartedly tried to edit the interview with the tour guide, his foot tapping frenetically under the desk. If these episodes didn't take off, he could kiss his fledgling YouTube career goodbye. With a rush, he pushed away from the desk, paced to the window and back. Before crouching down and digging through his camera bags, he pulled out his old mini GoPro and a small roll of gaffer's tape. Dennis quietly climbed the steps to the 3rd floor where the famous Lady in Blue's bedroom was located. The room had supposedly been preserved with Isabelle Chevalier's original furnishings, and while it wasn't rented out to guests, it was the highlight of the Chevalier House tour. He'd hoped to hide the camera in the Lady in Blue's room and possibly catch something spooky for his episode, but the door was locked. Across from the door stood a narrow side table, its mahogany frame carved with roses and curling vines. A painted medallion of faded blossoms decorated the front, and the spindly legs were joined by a lattice of scroll work near the floor. Dennis crouched low, sliding the tiny camera into the shadowy tangle of carved wood beneath the tabletop. From there, the lens had an unobstructed view of the hallway, hidden in plain sight, unless someone thought to peer past the filigree. As he walked back to his room, guilt crept in. What Leona doesn't know won't hurt her, he told himself. Maybe if he said it enough, he'd believe it. Chapter 3. Leona spent the afternoon making sure every detail of the evening's murder mystery dinner was in place. At $100 a ticket, the attendees needed to be impressed. Just as she finished assembling the last of the script packets, a notification chimed on her phone. One of the ticket holders wasn't coming anymore. And not just anyone. Darla Ashton, the influencer she'd given a free ticket to in exchange for promoting the B&B to her followers. Darla, for her part, had been all smiles and enthusiasm when she'd accepted Leona's offer, but apparently a more lucrative opportunity had come up, so now Darla was canceling. Great. Glancing back at the clock, Leona realized there wouldn't be enough time to find someone to fill the missing spot. She bit back a growl, staring at the ceiling and counting to 10, trying to calm herself. "I know that look," Agatha said, sidling up to the front desk, Flora coming in behind her. "Tell me what's wrong, Missy." "The influencer canceled." "Okay, so we have one less person tonight," Flora said. "Makes our lives easier in terms of serving the food and drinks, right?" Leona shook her head. "The murder mystery script we wrote is for 20 people, and Darla was supposed to play Isabel. We can't have a Lady in Blue mystery dinner party without the Lady in Blue herself. And I can't just reassign her because there's not enough time to adjust the script packets to account for some other character being removed." "Well, then that just means you'll have to fill in," Agatha replied. "And leave me taking care of everyone? I've never done this before, Leona. You promised I wouldn't do it alone," Flora cried. "Calm down, Missy. I'll help serve tonight. You won't be on your own," Agatha said. "No, Agatha, you've already worked a full shift today," Leona said firmly. "Don't take that tone with me, young lady," Agatha scolded, hands on her hips. "I've known you since you were 11. Promised your parents I'd watch out for you before they left, and if I say I'm helping, then I'm helping." Leona knew better than to argue further. A few hours later, Leona was waiting for the Chevalier House staff to gather for a final check-in before guests began arriving for the murder mystery party. Caroline, Agatha, and Leona chatted while waiting for Flora and Toby. Leona tried her best to participate in the conversation, but her mind was fixed on the night running smoothly. Were the placemats all set? Was the story too corny? What if someone else was a no-show? Was all this stress from running the extra events even worth it? Her thoughts were interrupted as Flora arrived. She flounced over to the gathered trio. "You clean up nice," Agatha said. "Thanks," Flora blushed, before turning to Caroline and gasping. "Oh, I love your bracelet. Is that new?" Caroline shifted, looking uncomfortable. "It was my grandmother's. She left it to me after she passed." "I didn't realize she left you any jewelry. That must be really nice having something of hers," Leona said. Caroline nodded. "I don't talk about it much." She quickly changed the subject. "Anyway, where's Toby? Late again, obviously." Flora frowned. "What's your deal with Toby? Why don't you like him?" "Just some things that went down in college," Leona interjected gently. "Enough gossip," Agatha said firmly. Flora grinned. "You're the worst gossip of us all, Agatha." Before Agatha could retort, Toby hurried in. As the dinner hour approached, Leona greeted guests filtering into the parlor. She smiled, complimented costumes, handed out script packets, and helped guests find their assigned seats around candlelit tables. The tables had been arranged in the garden, which was illuminated by hanging strings of Edison bulbs. The chatter and excitement in the air eased some of her nerves. Maybe the night was going to go well after all. Then, the final guest walked out into the garden. Dennis. Leona groaned inwardly. Most attendees had reserved their spots in pairs or small groups. Only 2 had single tickets. Darla, who had now bailed, and Dennis. She had paired their characters together when assigning roles, but with Darla gone, that meant she herself was now stuck with the ghost hunter. Wonderful. No doubt he'd pester her all night with questions and another pitch for that YouTube interview. She plastered a smile on her face as he approached. "Here's your packet, Mr. Kennedy. You'll be playing Isabelle Chevalier's fiancé, the old widower, Victor Devereaux." "Just Dennis, please. And who will you be playing?" he asked. "I'm filling in as Isabelle Chevalier," she answered. "Then it looks like the 2 of us will be working closely together tonight," he said with a grin. "Guess I'll have to be extra suspicious if I'm going to convince anyone that I offed for Isabelle's boyfriend." Leona stopped short. How did he know about that part of the legend? Leona's mom said Thomas Hale's suspicious death was too unsavory to be part of what they sold to guests. There wasn't time to ask, though. Caroline was calling everyone's attention as Leona scampered to her seat, Dennis trailing behind her. A tragedy has struck. Thomas Hale, the young schoolteacher often seen keeping company with Miss Isabelle Chevalier, has been found dead beneath the oaks by the riverfront. The coroner has declared it an accident. His wild horse threw him, yet rumors stir that darker forces are at play. Tonight, it falls to you to uncover the truth. Throughout the dinner, Leona found her attention snagging on Dennis more often than she'd liked. She tried to stay focused on keeping the game moving, but between enjoying Barry's delicious courses and following her script, she couldn't help noticing how easily he carried himself. She'd expected him to pester her about the interview, but instead he kept the conversation light, slipping in a wry comment here and there that made her laugh despite herself. Without realizing it, she found her polished hostess persona slipping, bantering with Dennis like an old friend. As they watched a few of the other participants puzzling over a clue, Dennis leaned closer. "Surprising no one's accused me yet. Maybe your fellow detectives aren't as sharp as they think. I was hoping someone would point the finger at me by now. Guess I'm blending in better than I thought." Leona arched a brow. "Blending in? You've practically announced yourself guilty twice." "Still, no fingers pointed my way." She smirked. "Or maybe they're just too entertained watching you make a fool of yourself." Dennis chuckled. "So, you think I'm entertaining?" Leona flushed. Her laugh joined his before the game pulled them back in. The rest of the evening unfolded better than she could have hoped. Guests leaned into their roles, laughter and mock accusations flying as clues were uncovered. By the end, the group correctly pieced together that Dennis's character had been the murderer. Several people lingered afterwards to tell Leona how much fun they had, and asked when the B&B would host another event like it. Stepping back into the lobby, Leona nearly stumbled into Dennis, waiting near the doorway. He gave her an easy smile. "That was a fun night." Leona arched a brow. "How did you know who the murderer was?" "I've been researching the story for my YouTube channel," Dennis said. "There's no story to research. I already looked. No one named Isabelle Chevalier has ever lived here," Leona scoffed. "Well, that's because her name wasn't Chevalier. It was Isabel Munson." Chapter 4. Dennis spent the morning darting around New Orleans with his camera bag slung over one shoulder. On the surface, it was productive, but, in truth, he was restless. Leona had agreed to meet with him at 1 p.m. to hear more about his findings on Isabel Munson. It was the first progress he had toward getting the interview he hoped to feature in his Lady in Blue episode. By the time he pulled into the B&B's small lot, the sun was high and the weight of his equipment felt twice as heavy. Dennis made his way to the office tucked behind the front desk and knocked on the open door, poking his head through to look for Leona. Papers covered nearly every inch of the desk inside, some sorted into neat piles, others spilling onto the floor, where Leona and Caroline were working side by side. "Is it 1 already?" Leona asked, glancing up from a stack of invoices. "I can come back another time," Dennis offered quickly. Leona started to nod, but Caroline cut in. "Girl, you have been working all morning, and you haven't even taken lunch. Leave the paperwork to me. You deserve a break." "You sure?" Leona asked. "Of course. That's what friends are for. And more importantly, that's what office managers are for. Now go," Caroline answered, waving her hand at Leona. Leona hesitated, then rose and followed Dennis out of the room. He caught the faint crease between her brows as she looked back toward the office. "Looks like you were knee-deep in some serious work," he said lightly. "Trying to reconcile finances," she admitted. "Some numbers aren't lining up, but I'm sure Caroline will sort it out." Dennis nodded. "Business records can be a beast. I learned the hard way about keeping personal and YouTube expenses separate after my first tax season." Leona gave a small smile. "I hear you. Caroline's been a lifesaver with all that." She led him across the courtyard to the carriage house. Dennis paused when she unlocked the door. "Didn't see this in the brochure." "That's because it's where I live," Leona said with a faint laugh. "My parents and I always stayed here so the main house could hold more guests." "So where are your folks these days?" Dennis asked. "Hiking somewhere along the Annapurna circuit in Nepal. I would have called Dad to ask about your Isabel Munson claim, but they won't have cell service for at least another week." Inside, the carriage house was cozy with mismatched furniture softened by quilts. Leona made 2 cups of tea before gesturing for him to take a seat in the living room. "All right, plead your case, Dennis. Why do you think the lady in blue is really Isabel Munson?" Dennis pulled notes and copies of records from his messenger bag, setting them on the coffee table. "At first, when I couldn't find matching records for Isabel Chevalier, I thought the lady in blue was just another made-up story. Then I stumbled across an obituary for a school teacher named Thomas Hale, and that caught my attention. If he was real, then maybe there was more to it." He flipped through a folder. "I tried tracking down other members of the Chevalier family, but couldn't find any record of anyone with that last name ever owning this house. So I changed tactics, started digging into shipping merchants in the area, and that's when I came across the Munsons. Turns out they did own the property, and the family had a daughter named Isabel." Leona leaned forward, scanning a photocopied record. "It could still be a coincidence." "I wondered that too," Dennis admitted. "So I called a friend of mine, an archivist here in New Orleans. He found an obituary for Isabel Munson. She died young, never married. It lines up with the bones of the story." Leona sat back slowly, tea forgotten in her hands. Dennis met her eyes. "I'm meeting with my archivist buddy tonight to go over the records in person. Come with me. See it for yourself." After a moment, Leona nodded. On the way back to his room, guilt gnawed at Dennis. After last night, laughing with Leona and their friendly encounter now, the little camera he had planted outside the lady in blue's room suddenly felt like a much bigger betrayal. Instead of turning down the hallway to his room on the 2nd floor, Dennis continued up the stairs. The 3rd floor hallway was hushed, the old floorboards creaking beneath his steps. As he neared the attic door, voices startled him. Flora and Toby emerged from that direction, both looking surprised. Flora flushed and spluttered something about checking another room before turning sharply and hurrying off. "What are you doing up here?" Toby asked. "Just curious about the lady in blue's room," Dennis said with a shrug. "Thought I heard something coming from in there. Wondering if maybe I could get a tour." The color drained from Toby's face. "No way. I don't do ghost stuff. You'll need to find someone else for that," he stammered, before retreating down the hall. When the coast was clear, Dennis crouched beside the ornate side table where he'd hidden the camera. He slipped it free, heart pounding, and shoved it into his bag. Back in his room, Dennis couldn't bring himself to check the footage. The guilt was bad enough already, but at least now, Leona would never find out. Chapter 5. Leona found Dennis waiting by his car in the inn's gravel lot, leaning against the driver's side. He straightened when he saw her. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter against the breeze. They climbed into his car, the hum of the engine filling the quiet as he steered them out of the lot. "So," Leona asked, "how exactly did you talk your way into viewing private archives?" He grinned. "My winsome personality, of course. But really, I made a video last year about antebellum trade routes. Interviewed this archivist Stu, and we hit it off. He likes having someone to talk shop with who isn't asleep by the third ledger." Leona smirked. "I can't imagine anyone finding ledgers thrilling." "Depends on what's in them," Dennis said, eyes on the road. That made her shift in her seat. The inn's books and ledgers had been on her mind all day. The supply and maintenance numbers still didn't add up. She forced a polite nod, not wanting to let him see how tight her stomach felt. Dennis filled the silence with talk of his work on the YouTube channel. Leona listened as he described researching ideas and working with brands. "Sounds like a fun job," she said. "I'm making it sound a lot more exciting than it is. Editing until 3 a.m. isn't exactly the definition of glamorous." "I'll let you in on a secret. Running an inn isn't as glamorous as you'd think either. It's a lot more laundry and paperwork than people would imagine." "Guess we're both in businesses that eat up all our time." "Guess so," she said softly, and the car rolled on toward the library. Leona had expected to find herself in a dark, dusty basement, but the library's archive room was brightly lit and smelled faintly of lemon polish. Stu, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted them warmly. "Dennis! And this must be Miss Brown. He told me you got the most haunted house in New Orleans." "Don't believe all the hype," Leona said lightly. Stu chuckled and spread several boxes across a long table. Dennis leaned in close. "See this? It's a news article about Thomas Hale's death." Leona skimmed the brittle page, her pulse quickening. She set it down carefully. "So he isn't just a story?" "No, he was flesh and blood, if the records are to be believed," Stu said, before carefully lifting a small bundle of letters out of one of the boxes. "These are from Thomas Hale's estate. Some appear to be love letters signed by Isabel Munson." Leona traced a finger over the fragile paper. The writing looped beautifully, and she imagined the elegant hand that wrote it. Was she really holding something Isabel had touched? For years she had felt foolish for believing in the lady in blue. Now the letters whispered that she may not have been entirely wrong to believe. The whiplash made her chest ache. She blinked hard as her eyes burned, tears beginning to leak out of their corners. Stu was turning to ask her a question, but Dennis seemed to have noticed her distress. Without missing a beat, he launched into questions about preservation methods, drawing Stu's full attention. Leona blinked away the sting in her eyes, grateful for Dennis buying her an extra moment to steady herself. The car ride back to the B&B was quiet at first. Street lamps flicked on as dusk gathered, throwing soft gold across the windshield. Finally, Leona spoke. "Sorry about earlier. I didn't expect to react like that." Dennis shook his head. "Don't apologize." He paused before adding, "Do you want to talk about it?" She sighed. "When I was a kid, my dad was larger than life. I thought it was so cool. He'd seen the lady in blue, and I wanted more than anything to meet her myself. But then I tried researching her and she trailed off.
And you didn't find anything?
Dennis finished. Leona nodded. It felt like he was just this con man tricking all of our customers for years. But if Isabel really existed... Her throat ached as tears once again threatened. She turned her face toward the window, wishing she could hide, when Dennis reached over and squeezed her hand. That simple gesture broke through the heaviness she'd been carrying all evening. If Isabel really existed, it would just mean a lot to me now that I'm the one running the B&B, she said at last. Dennis gave Leona's hand one last squeeze before returning his to the steering wheel.
I can tell how much you care about Chevalier House, and I know digging into this has brought up a lot for you. If there's anything I can do to help you sort this all out, just know I'm here, he said. She peered over at Dennis as he drove, grateful for his steadiness in that moment. As they pulled into the B&B's drive, a quiet warmth lingered between them, an ease that hadn't been there before. And underneath that ease was the faintest spark of attraction growing just outside her awareness. Chapter 6. The next morning, Dennis walked into the dining room expecting to see Leona, but instead found Agatha ferrying coffee carafes between tables. He grabbed a plate of eggs and fruit from the buffet before sitting down at a small table near the window. "Morning," he said as Agatha passed by. "You can stop looking around like a lost puppy. Leona's not working. It's her weekend and she never dines with guests," Agatha returned briskly. But no sooner had she finished speaking than the door opened and in walked Leona. She looked freshly showered, her hair still damp at the ends. "Mind if I join you?" she asked Dennis, pointing to the empty seat at his table. "Course not,"
Dennis said, scooting his chair a little to the side. Agatha eyed Leona.
"Well, I'll be.
Now, if you're going to stroll in here for breakfast, Missy, you might as well take over so I don't have to wrangle that cretin in the kitchen myself." Leona grinned as she set down her plate. "Morning to you too, Agatha." Dennis raised a brow.
"Cretin?"
"She means our cook, Barry. You know, she and Barry are crazy about each other." Agatha scoffed before stomping over to another table to clear dirty dishes.
"Doesn't seem like it,"
Dennis said. Leona laughed. "Their love's just a little rough around the edges." Dennis leaned back, smirking.
"If that's love, you might need a new dictionary."
Leona smirked herself. "What, you don't think slammed doors and cold shoulders are romantic?"
"I guess it depends on whether they're buttering me up with beignets afterward," he countered, lifting his mug. "But maybe that's just me."
Leona leaned in to whisper. In all seriousness, though, she really does have a soft spot for him. Admitted it to me once. Dennis eyed the aged woman as she huffed back into the dining room from the kitchen, struggling to picture her secretly enjoying the cook's attentions. Leona and Dennis's banter lingered, light and teasing for the remainder of breakfast, until their eyes met and held a beat too long. Leona cleared her throat as Dennis noticed the warmth creeping into her cheeks. "So?" she said, forcing a casual tone. "The reason I joined you for breakfast was to see if you'd want to explore the attic today. Might be something up there worth drumming up for your channel." Dennis lit up.
"Absolutely. That sounds perfect."
A few hours later, they climbed the narrow staircase that led to the attic. The cramped space was hot with the smell of dust and cedar. Dennis pulled his camera from his bag.
"Mind if I record us looking around in case we find something cool?"
"Sure, go ahead." They rummaged through boxes and crates, talking easily as they shifted aside moth-eaten blankets and old crockery. "Dennis, look!" In the corner sat a chest with Munson painted across the lid. Together they pried it open to reveal a tumble of dusty clothes. At the very bottom,
lay a folded gown of faded red silk. Leona let out a sharp breath. "Do you think this was her dress?" Dennis crouched beside her.
"Too bad it's not the famous blue one."
"She was probably buried in it," Leona answered. Dennis helped pull the remaining fabric out of the trunk as Leona lifted the dress against her figure. He was about to say something admiring when he noticed her eyes snap to the bottom of the trunk. Staring up at them was a slim, modern-looking notebook that had been tucked away beneath the dress.
"What's that?"
he asked, straightening. Leona dropped the dress and plucked the notebook from the trunk, her face going white as she turned the pages slowly. "It's one of the B&B's ledgers, and not just any ledger. This has a bunch of figures from our renovation."
"Wonder how it got mixed up in the attic storage. Guess we'll just pop that back downstairs, huh?"
Dennis offered. "No," Leona said. "You don't understand. This ledger is already downstairs. All the dates and line items are the same as the one I was looking at earlier today. Only the numbers don't match. The maintenance and remodeling costs in this one are way lower than the one down in the office." She looked up at Dennis, frowning. "Someone's been messing with the B&B's finances." Chapter 7. Leona carried the attic ledger down to the office, Dennis close behind her. Her pulse thrummed as she pushed the door open. Caroline glanced up from the desk, startled. "What's wrong? I thought you'd be off for the afternoon." She quickly tidied up the papers she was working with and neatly stashed them in the desk drawer before coming round to Leona. Leona laid the ledger on the desk. "We found this hidden in an old trunk up in the attic." Caroline flipped through the pages, her brow furrowed. "Strange. A lot of these maintenance items are the same as the ledger over here." She grabbed an identical notebook, flipping it open. "The date for these paint costs is the same in both ledgers, but the cost in the attic ledger are way lower." Dennis lingered by the door, watching them both.
"So, which one was tampered with?"
Caroline muttered as she compared figures. "Assuming the one you two found in the attic is the real ledger, it would mean our office copy was falsified. And now that I'm looking at it, some of the quantities in our office ledger don't make sense. Why would we have 2 more identical orders of paint just a few days after the original order was placed? That's 3 times more than we actually would have needed." "But who would do this?" Leona asked. Caroline looked up. "Isn't it obvious, girl? Everything that looks funky in this ledger ties back to the renovation. And who was in charge of doing a lot of that work?" "Toby," Leona said bleakly. Dennis stepped closer.
"The handyman? How would he even change the books?"
"He's got keys to every room, doesn't he?" Caroline said, her tone sharp. "Easy enough to slip in here unnoticed." No, I can't believe that," Leona protested. "Girl, be smart here. All of those weird invoices we were reconciling this morning were signed off by Toby. He was a cheat in college, and he's a cheat now," Caroline said. Leona's stomach sank. "I thought he'd turned over a new leaf." Dennis touched her arm gently.
"We should take this to the police."
Caroline shook her head emphatically. "Without proof, it won't stick. Do you really want the headache of dealing with the cops for nothing? Best thing is to fire him before he does more damage." Dennis frowned.
"If you let him go, he'll just pull the same stunt somewhere else. If anything, we need to catch him in the act."
Caroline shot him a look. "And you've got experience catching criminals, do you?" Leona straightened. "Enough. Dennis has a point. If we can prove it, we'll have something solid to take to the police." Caroline exhaled slowly. "Fine. He's got a few days off. We'll put our heads together and come up with a plan to catch him in the act. But I still think you should just fire him and be done with it. You didn't listen to me about hiring him in the first place, and now you're regretting it. I don't want you to end up regretting this choice too." "I'll keep that in mind," Leona said softly. The words felt flat, her throat tight. Caroline softened slightly. "Sorry for the tough love." Take the afternoon off. You look awful. I'll finish sorting everything in here. If I find anything, I'll let you know."
Leona nodded and walked back to the carriage house in a daze. She sunk onto the couch, too drained to move. Toby had always been kind to her in college, the type of person she couldn't help but like. Sure, it had been a shock when he'd been expelled for cheating, but when he came to her looking for a job years later, promising to work hard, Leona found she couldn't say no to his sincere, easy smile. If Caroline was right, then he'd betrayed her trust completely. The thought hollowed her out. A knock at the door broke the silence. When she opened it, Dennis stood there, hesitant.
"Hey, so I didn't feel right just abandoning you after all that. I'm sorry you're going through this. Do you need anything?"
Leona gave him a watery smile. "Honestly, I could use a distraction." Dennis smiled.
"I think I've got just the thing."
Chapter 8. A steamboat ride? Dennis, this is for lame tourists, Leona huffed, as soon as she'd realized where he was taking her.
"Humor me,"
he said, offering his hand as they joined the short line at the gangway.
"You'll have fun, I promise."
Leona eyed the painted paddle wheel with open skepticism.
"Fine," she said.
"But this better not turn into eating some sad excuse for gumbo that's being passed off as authentic cuisine."
"I'd never do you dirty like that,"
Dennis said with a wink.
"Besides, this isn't a dinner cruise, it's just drinks and appetizers. The cook used to be head chef at Salted Cypress."
Leona's expression shifted, less frosty now. "Salted Cypress? You mean that trendy restaurant on Frenchman Street?" Dennis nodded, and Leona gave an exaggerated sigh. "Well, I guess it's too late to back out now." She tried not to smile and failed a little. They climbed aboard and found a spot along the railing halfway down the starboard side. The deckhands cast off and the boat lumbered into the current with a steady churn. Behind them, the band eased into a standard, the trumpet carrying sweet and clear. Leona rested her forearms on the rail as the shoreline slid by. Dennis watched as the tension in her posture eased a fraction at a time. They wandered toward the bar and each ordered a drink, Leona choosing a sparkling water with lime and Dennis a light beer. Glasses in hand, they slipped away from the main cluster of tourists near the bow and found a quieter nook further down the deck. The strains of jazz reached them faintly, softened by distance, while the chatter of the crowd faded into a pleasant hum. The two settled into chairs side by side, their conversation meandering easily. After a while, Leona went quiet, staring at her glass instead of the scenery passing by. Dennis tilted his head.
"You're thinking about the B&B, aren't you?"
She nodded glumly. He thought back to the scene in the office and grimaced as Caroline's harsh words played back in his mind. Tough love, she'd called it.
"Caroline came down pretty hard on you today. Are you all right?"
Leona smoothed a wrinkle from her blouse. "I know she's prickly at times, but you just haven't had a chance to get to know her. She means well."
"You see the best in people. I can respect that."
Leona stared out at the water. Is that actually a good thing? I mean, I saw the best in Toby, and look where that got me. Her voice cracked, and with it the composure she was clinging to. Tears slipped free as she pressed her face into her hands. "I trusted him," she whispered. "I thought he was my friend." Dennis slid an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him without thinking, her tears soaking into his shirt. Dennis waited, giving her the time she needed to compose herself. The boat's engines thudded through the deck. She pulled away, sniffling. Dennis turned so his shoulder touched hers. The contact was light, but she seemed grateful and leaned into it as well. He said nothing and kept his eyes on the water until her breathing steadied. "Sorry, I'm not usually like this. It's
just upsetting. Dennis shook his head gently. It says you're the kind of person who doesn't write people off. You took a chance on Toby and it didn't work out. Doesn't mean the next leap of faith won't work out. Leona gave a small, reluctant smile. You sound like someone who's taken a few leaps of faith yourself. Well, quitting my job at the first sign of YouTube success was definitely a leap of faith, but jury's still out on how that's turning out, he said, laughing lightly. In my defense, I figured the internet was just waiting for a soft-spoken nerd to talk about spooky history. Is it? On Tuesdays, he said. Wednesdays, it prefers raccoons stealing pizza. That pulled a real laugh from her. As the boat pointed downstream and the skyline fell behind, the air cooled as a breeze rose off the water. Tell me about your worst shoot. Dennis groaned. That's easy. Abandoned hospital, central Louisiana, last summer. No AC, 1,000 mosquitoes, and the only audio that survived was the part where I called the trip a dud. Tragic, she said, lips curving. He watched the way her mouth softened when she smiled. Your turn. Worst guest. Leona didn't hesitate. Bachelorette party that consisted of drunk woo girls who definitely lied about their ages. They set off the fire alarm at 2 a.m. because they were trying to roast shrimp on tea light candles. Dennis winced. Agatha still won't let me buy tea lights. She laughed. They fell quiet again. The city began to glow as afternoon sloped toward evening. The boat swung into a wide curve as the sun sank lower. A wash of orange slid across the water. Leona's face softened in the light as she gave him a shy smile before leaning her head onto his shoulder. I'm glad you came with me, he said, smiling. Leona looked up at him, crinkling her nose. I hate to admit it, but you were right. The steamboat cruise has been fun. She lifted her head to smile at him, her face bathed in the sunset's soft golden light. The wind blew a wisp of hair across her face. Dennis slowly reached over and tucked it behind her ear, fingers ghosting softly across her cheek. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. His voice came out softer than he intended. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved, the moment stretching like honey in the golden light. Leona's eyes searched his face, and he saw the exact moment her decision was made. When he leaned closer, she didn't pull away. Instead, she rose slightly to meet him, her hand finding his chest as their lips touched in the softest whisper of a kiss. The world seemed to fade slowly around them until there was only this moment, only them. When they finally drew apart, Dennis rested his forehead against hers. He wanted to memorize everything about this moment. Hi, he whispered, which was possibly the most ridiculous thing he could have said, but it made her laugh anyway, a bright, unguarded sound he was sure to love. Hi yourself, she answered, before pressing another quick kiss on his lips. Dennis tried not to grin and failed completely, sending Leona into another fit of gentle laughter. He could have floated back to shore on pure happiness. After they returned to the B&B, Dennis walked Leona to the door of the carriage house. She lingered on the step. You should know I have a rule about not kissing customers, she teased. Dennis rubbed the back of his neck. We don't have to again if it's uncomfortable for you. It's not, she said softly, then with a mischievous spark in her eye. But let's keep it on the down low. If Agatha catches us, she'll never let me hear the end of it. She leaned in, kissed him goodnight, and slipped inside. With a grin tugging at his mouth, Dennis made his way back to his room in the main house. He opened his laptop to work on some video editing, but his thoughts kept circling the evening. As he trimmed clips and adjusted sound, his mind wandered back to Toby. He needed to help Leona put together a plan to catch him in the act. The memory of running into Toby and Flora near the attic nagged at him. They'd acted strange, shifty. He didn't want to upset Leona with speculation that another employee was involved in potential fraud. He resolved to take it to Caroline first and see what she thought. The next morning, Dennis lingered on the veranda, waiting for Caroline to start her shift. He drummed his fingers against the arm of the chair, trying to figure out how to start the conversation. Caroline had made it clear she wasn't his biggest fan, and the last thing he wanted was to put her further on edge. A gray Kia pulled up into the lot. Caroline stepped out with her bag slung over one shoulder. Dennis shot up and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Not feeling fancy today?" Caroline squinted at him. "What?" He winced. Your car. It's not the red BMW you were driving the other day." Caroline's expression narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you in town the first day I got here. You were driving a red BMW." She rolled her eyes. "That's my boyfriend's car. Now what do you want? I've got a mountain of invoices and records to review thanks to this whole Toby mess, and I don't have time to sit around talking about cars." Dennis cleared his throat. "Right, I remembered something. I ran into Toby and Flora near the attic the other day, and they looked off. Do you think Flora could be in on it with him?" Caroline frowned. "Well, we can't rule it out. Best thing is to look for evidence, either to confirm her involvement or to clear her. I'll keep an eye out." She adjusted her bag and strode inside, without another word. Dennis remained on the veranda. Evidence. His chest tightened with dread. The hidden camera he'd planted near the attic might already hold exactly what they needed, but using it meant confessing another deception to the woman who just opened her heart to him. Dennis closed his eyes, remembering the way Leona had crumbled when she talked about Toby's betrayal. "I trusted him. I thought he was my friend." How long before she said the same words about him? Chapter 9. Leona curled into the corner of her sofa with a mug of mint tea and her journal balanced on her knees. She tapped her pen against the page, trying to sort the jumble in her head. On one side sat the bruising weight of Toby's betrayal, the ledger with its crooked numbers looming before her every time she closed her eyes. On the other was yesterday evening, and the kiss Dennis gave her under the soft glow of sunset. The memory made her stomach flutter like a teenager's. She shook her head from the emotional whiplash. She didn't know if she ought to march across the courtyard to find Dennis or bury herself in invoices with Caroline until she understood how much money had vanished. Except Caroline had already shooed her away, reminding her pointedly that it was supposed to be her day off. As she scribbled out her thoughts, the realization hit her that Dennis's stay was almost over. He had booked a week at the B&B, and 2 days remained. Then he would pack up and head back to Baton Rouge. The thought of him leaving pinched more than she wanted to admit. The loneliness of running the business solo had crept up on her gradually, so gradually she'd almost convinced herself she preferred it that way. But Dennis asked questions about her work, like he actually wanted to hear the answers. He'd spent an evening listening to her ramble about supply vendors and seemed genuinely entertained rather than politely bored. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? Like her passion for the B&B was something worth celebrating rather than enduring. But what if she was reading too much into it? Maybe the kiss had been nothing more than vacation romance, the kind that felt significant in the moment, but would fade the instant his real life resumed. She set down her pen and stared out the window toward the B&B. What did she even want from this? A long-distance relationship stretched between here and Baton Rouge? Leona pressed her palms against her eyes. But then she remembered how he'd studied her patiently as her emotions got the best of her when they were talking about Toby and the steamboat. "Don't give that up," a resolute voice spoke inside of her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see Dennis waiting on her doorstep, hands shoved in his pockets. Her heart did a little skip, and she realized she'd already made her choice between invoices and whatever this was becoming. She opened the door to greet him. "Hey," he said, looking down at the ground. "I wanted to talk to you." "I did too," she said brightly. "Do you want to go for a walk? I've been cooped up all day and I could really use the fresh air." "I would like that," he said with a crooked smile. Leona stepped out and laced her fingers through his, tugging him gently towards the creek at the back of the property. Afternoon light thinned between the trees as the path narrowed, then opened to the creek. "This was one of my favorite spots to come as a kid," she sighed as she breathed in the cool air that smelled faintly of damp leaves. "You're checking out in 2 days," Leona said as they walked further along. He nodded. "Sunday morning." They paused at a bend where the bank rose. A low bench sat beneath a sycamore that had grown at an angle, its bark pale and peeling. Leona sat and patted the place beside her. Dennis dropped down, elbows on his knees, looking out at the water. "I haven't been in a real relationship in a long time," she said. "Not since college, really. I kept telling myself I would make time once things with the B&B calmed down. Then one season turned into another." She looked at him shyly. Dennis's face was open as he watched her. She braced herself with a deep breath. "I really like you, Dennis," she said. "If this is a vacation crush that's just going to evaporate the minute you drive away, please tell me, because I'm not interested in a fling." Leona swallowed. "I guess what I'm trying to say is Baton Rouge isn't that far away, you know?" Dennis turned toward her, his grin wide. "Not far at all." Her heart thumped. "We'd have to plan," she said, trailing off. "My schedule is flexible. I could drive down for weekends if you can spare an occasional room at the B&B for me." She smiled. "And I've got some college friends I could stay with in Baton Rouge if I were to visit you." "Then we try it," he said simply. "If it's hard, we'll say so. If it works, we'll make it work more." The knot in her chest loosened. "I want to kiss you," she blurted. "Thought you had a rule about not kissing guests," he teased. "I'm making an exception." The kiss she gave him was braver than the one on the steamboat, and when they broke apart, Leona smiled, cheeks flushed. They made their way back towards the carriage house. Leona was grateful for this one bright spot in her life and kicked herself for almost letting him pass her by over something as silly as his interest in a ghost story, which reminded her. "I'm sorry I dropped our research into the Lady in Blue. I know it really matters to you, and it matters for your channel." "You've got nothing to be sorry for. You've had more important things on your plate." She studied him. "Do you still want to do that interview? I mean, that's what you came here to talk to me about in the first place, right?" He looked surprised, then hesitated. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. I was hoping to interview you, but I didn't want you to feel pressured or anything like that." "All right, let me put on some makeup and then we can record." "Okay. Just meet me back in my room. My recording equipment's all there." She expected him to kiss her again, but instead, Dennis turned on his heel stiffly and headed back to the B&B. Chapter 10. Dennis unpacked his tripod with slower movements than usual, setting each leg carefully, locking it into place, then pausing with a hand still on the hinge. He should have felt excited. Leona had just agreed to do the interview he'd wanted since the moment he arrived. Instead, guilt gnawed at him. He'd promised himself he would tell her the truth when he went down to the carriage house. But then she'd asked him to go for that walk and confessed her feelings. He couldn't remember the last time he'd just clicked with someone, like he had with her. Dennis couldn't bring himself to ruin that moment by confessing he'd planted a camera without her knowledge. With a sigh, Dennis shoved the tripod aside and pulled his laptop onto the bed. He slid out the memory card from the hidden camera outside the Lady in Blue's room. He hadn't dared watch it yet. His thumb hovered over the trackpad, reluctant to face both the footage and his own cowardice. A knock sounded at the door. He scrambled to close the laptop. When he opened the door, Leona stood there, hair brushed smooth, a hint of color on her cheeks. She looked ready for the interview. He couldn't pretend any longer. "Before we start," Dennis said. His voice cracked and he cleared his throat. "There's, something I need to tell you. Actually, something I need to show you. It's probably going to change how you see me." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Dennis gestured toward the laptop on the bed. "First, I need you to know, I think Flora might be involved with the ledgers too." Leona blinked, confused. "What? No, Flora's a sweetheart. She would never." "You thought the same thing about Toby," Dennis said gently. "I told Caroline my suspicions and she admitted it could be possible. Not that she wanted to talk much after I made things awkward bringing up her boyfriend's BMW. Leona frowned. "Caroline doesn't have a boyfriend." Dennis paused. She told me... You know what? Never mind. I'm stalling." He rubbed the back of his neck. "There's something I need to confess. That first day here, when you were avoiding me, I thought I'd never get the interview. So I installed a hidden camera outside of the Lady in Blue's room." Leona's eyes widened. "You what?" "I thought maybe I'd catch something spooky for the video. I was desperate, Leona. I needed this episode to stand out." Her mouth fell open. "So you just decided to casually violate my privacy? Not to mention my guests' privacy. Where else did you put one of these cameras?" "Nowhere else. Just the hall near the attic." "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I trusted you." Leona pushed to her feet, face flushing with anger. Dennis reached out, catching her hand before she could storm away. "Wait, please. There's a reason I'm telling you now. The camera, it might have caught Toby in the act. It could be the evidence you need to go to the police." Her expression faltered. "You have him on camera, with the ledger." "I don't know," Dennis admitted. "I haven't gone through all the footage yet, but I'm pretty sure it caught something. When I went to take the camera down, I ran into Toby acting shady. I felt so guilty afterwards, I just couldn't bring myself to look." Leona shook her head, lips pressed thin. "I don't care about your explanations right now. Just show me what you've got so I can leave." Dennis swallowed hard and opened his laptop. He pulled up the footage. On screen, Flora tugged Toby into frame. Toby laughed, asking, "Where are we going?" Flora spun, kissed him quickly, and whispered something about having 5 minutes before Agatha came back from her break. Then the two giggled and slipped up into the attic. Leona leaned back, arms crossed. "Those little sneaks were making out in my attic. They never said anything about seeing each other." She turned to Dennis. "But this doesn't prove anything about the ledger." "Maybe Toby took it up earlier. Let's just rewind back further." They scrolled through the footage. Agatha appeared carrying cleaning supplies. A guest ambled down the hallway toward their room. Nothing useful. Dennis sped up the playback. "Stop!" Leona cried suddenly. She pointed at the screen. "There, go back." Dennis dragged the cursor. The grainy frame resolved into Caroline. She walked quickly up to the door of the attic, holding something in her arms. As she opened the attic door, she turned back to glance both ways. There, clutched in her grip, was the ledger. She scurried up the attic stairs, and moments later reemerged, empty-handed. Chapter 11. Leona picked at her nails as she sat stiffly in the detective's office. It had been the longest month of her life. Across from her, a weary-eyed investigator leafed through a folder, while a forensic accountant scrolled through spreadsheets on a laptop. She had broken off things with Dennis, but before he left, He had helped her install hidden cameras in the office. To keep Caroline from catching wind of the real investigation, Leona had staged a ruse. She'd pulled Toby aside. "Toby, I'm calling in a favor. I can't explain everything, but I need people to think I've fired you for a while, maybe a month or two. You'll still get your paycheck, of course, but..." He had cut her off with a shake of his head. "Leona, you gave me a job when I was down. You don't owe me an explanation. If something's going on and you need me to keep quiet for a bit, I'll keep quiet. And you don't need to pay me if I'm not working. I'll pick up DoorDash and Uber Eat runs. It'll be fine." That kind of loyalty had nearly undone her. She had hugged him quickly and then forced herself to play the part. Later, she told Caroline that she'd fired Toby and planned to bring in the authorities to investigate. Caroline once again tried to dissuade her, but Leona remained firm about contacting the police. It wasn't long before the hidden cameras picked up on Caroline frantically falsifying documents, bending numbers until they fit the frame she wanted, the one that pointed straight at Toby. Now, after weeks of tension, the investigation had run its course. When the investigator shut the folder and looked up, Leona's throat went dry. "The bank statements and credit card records tell us enough," he said. "Payments tied to padded invoices ended up in accounts controlled by Caroline. She made several large purchases, including a diamond bracelet and a BMW. There's no question." Leona's pulse thudded, remembering the bracelet Caroline had supposedly inherited from her grandmother. So she really did it. The forensic accountant nodded. "The theft totals $62,000. "62?" Leona's voice broke. "That can't be right. I would have noticed that." "It was hidden. She buried it in cost overruns and inflated invoices. You did have one contractor go over budget legitimately, but she used that as a cover to inflate dozens of other charges," the accountant said. Leona's head dropped into her hands. She remembered how stressed she'd been after the contractor admitted costs were climbing. Caroline had laid a comforting hand on her shoulder, told her she'd handle it from there. Leona had believed her, trusted her. Now it twisted like betrayal upon betrayal. The detective's voice was steady. "You're fortunate to have the video evidence as well. Between that and the financial records, it's more than enough to prosecute." "Wait," Leona said slowly. "The ledger we found in the attic, I know Caroline put it there, but I just couldn't understand why. Was it just to help her frame Toby?" The detective nodded. "That's our assessment. She knew your bank was scrutinizing the accounts. If you'd found that ledger without the video evidence, all signs would have pointed to your handyman. His access, his history, the fact that he signed off on most of those invoices, it would have been a solid frame job." Leona looked up, throat tight. She thought of Dennis, how furious she'd been with him, how quickly she'd cast him aside. The hidden camera she'd condemned him for had ended up saving her business. "So, what now?" she asked. "Now, we arrest her." "But I haven't decided if I want to press charges yet. Can't I just make her pay it all back?" The detective shook his head. "Theft, forgery, and false accounting are all technically crimes against the state, not just you. She stole $62,000. That affects vendors, banks, tax filings. Her arrest isn't optional." Leona's stomach sank. "And when will you..." She swallowed. "When will you do it?" "Now, actually," he said simply, rising to his feet. "Our team should be wrapping up taking her into custody as we speak." The accountant closed the laptop with a soft click. The sound echoed through Leona's nerves. In moments, Caroline would be led away, and nothing about the B&B or Leona's life would look the same again. Chapter 12. Leona returned to the B&B with her stomach still knotted. On the way, she had called Toby and asked him to meet her there for a staff meeting. She barely got through the front doors before Agatha, Flora, and Barry swarmed her. "Finally," Agatha said. "Where have you been, Missy? Police just swarmed the B&B and carted off Caroline. They wouldn't tell us anything. Ugh, Leona groaned. Did the guests see? We lucked out, Flora said quickly. Most were out sightseeing and the few who stayed were up in their rooms. You going to tell us what the heck is going on or what? Agatha demanded. Leona held up her hands. We'll wait for Toby and then I'll explain everything. I thought Toby was fired, Flora said frostily, crossing her arms. She'd given Leona a cold shoulder since the announcement that Toby was being let go. Leona shook her head. He agreed to go on leave as part of the investigation. Barry whistled. So Toby's in on this little scheme, huh? Leona nodded. He was a real lifesaver. Minutes later, Toby walked in through the door. Everyone filed into the office after Leona, tense and expectant, as she told them everything from the B&B's financial troubles to finding the falsified ledgers and the ensuing investigation. Flora shook her head, eyes wide. I don't get it. Why would Caroline do something like this? I don't know either, Leona said softly. Maybe she'll confess and explain her motives. She was jealous, Agatha muttered darkly. Barry crossed his arms. All I know is it's rotten to try and pin it on my man Toby. Toby shrugged, not looking surprised. Honestly, I can't say I'm shocked. All eyes turned to him. His face reddened and he looked sheepish. You can't just blab out something like that and not finish your story, Agatha barked. Toby gulped, then slowly confessed. Well, back in college, when I got, kicked out for cheating, everyone in the room nodded. Well, Caroline sold me one of her research papers for $200. I was supposed to rewrite it, but I accidentally turned in her draft. Leona's jaw dropped. She's been mad at me since. Even though I made sure she didn't get in trouble, I told the school I stole it. I figured it was my mess to sort out, not hers. Flora stared at him. Why would you do that? Toby smirked. Snitches get stitches, Barry guffawed, breaking the heaviness for a moment. Leona rubbed her temples. It's been a long day. I think I need a break. As everyone stood to leave, Leona gestured for Flora and Toby to stay behind. They exchanged a wary look and sat. Listen, I know about the two of you, Leona said evenly. Flora's face went pale. The thing is, Leona raised a hand. Relax. There's no policy against dating. Barry's practically reciting sonnets to Agatha every day. Flora let out a shaky laugh, some of the tension draining from her shoulders. You two are free to date, Leona continued. For the record, I think you make a cute couple, but no more sneaking around to make out during shifts, okay? Toby grinned. Well, we were holding off telling anyone in case it didn't work out, but it's serious. I really love her and I don't want to hide it anymore. Flora blinked at him. Really? Really, he said, before nearly being knocked off his chair as she launched herself into his arms. Leona smiled as they embraced, then shooed them out. But once the doors shut, her mind circled back to Dennis. It had been a month, yet she still couldn't get him out of her head. Even through the chaos, he was there in her thoughts. But her wallowing was interrupted as her phone buzzed. A video call from her parents lit up the screen, their first contact since she'd sent them a frantic email about Caroline. Their faces appeared, backlit by the weak glow of what looked like a cafe lantern. Her mother's hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her cheeks ruddy from weeks of trekking. We finally found internet service, she said breathlessly. Oh, honey, we got your email about Caroline. We had to call the moment we could get through. Leona's chest tightened at seeing their familiar faces. It's been awful, honestly. Awful could barely sum up the past month. Her dad leaned closer to the camera, his beard longer than she remembered. Tell us what happened. Your email didn't have all the details. Her parents listened without interruption, their expressions growing grave with each revelation. I can't believe Caroline would do something like this, her mother finally said, shaking her head. She seemed so devoted to you, to the B&B. That's what makes it worse, Leona admitted. I keep replaying conversations, wondering if I missed signs. If I was just blind to who she really was.
You weren't blind, kiddo. You were betrayed, and there's a difference.
Her dad's voice was gentle but firm. The simple validation nearly undid her. She blinked back tears she thought she'd cried out weeks ago. This Dennis fellow, her mother continued, the one who helped with the cameras, he sounds like he really came through for you in the end. Leona's throat constricted. Yeah, well, that's complicated too. Her parents exchanged a look she recognized from childhood.
Complicated how?
Her dad asked. I was awful to him when I found out about the camera. I was so angry about the privacy violation that I ended things between us before they even started. But without that camera, she trailed off, the irony still bitter. Without that camera, I would have lost everything. So call him, her mother said simply. It's, not that easy. I said some pretty harsh things and told him I couldn't trust him. Her dad adjusted the phone, and she could see more of the small cafe behind him. Other travelers hunched over laptops and phones, grabbing their own brief moments of connection with home.
You know, kiddo, your mom and I had our share of trust issues early on, too.
Her mother snorted. Trust issues, Phil. You disappeared for 3 days without calling because you were helping a friend move and didn't think to mention it was your ex-girlfriend.
Technically, she was a friend, he said with a sheepish grin. Point is, people make mistakes. Sometimes the person worth fighting for is the one who owns up to theirs.
Leona twisted a strand of hair around her finger. He did own up to it, confessed even though he could have just deleted the footage and I never would have known. Sounds like he chose honesty over self-preservation, her mother observed. The conversation shifted as her mother glanced at her watch. Oh, I have to run. I'm meeting some of the other hikers at the market. You two keep talking. She blew a kiss at the screen and disappeared, leaving Leona alone with her father.
So,
he said, settling back in the chair.
What else is eating at you? I can tell there's more.
Trust her dad to read her so easily, even across continents and through a pixelated video feed. Dennis was researching the lady in blue, she said finally. He found out her real name was Isabel Munson. Dad, did you know about that? Her father nodded.
I wondered when that would come up.
Why didn't you ever tell me? Her father's expression grew complicated.
She was real, he said quietly. I tried to tell you that when you were in high school, remember, but you were so angry about the Chevalier name being fake that you wouldn't let me finish.
Leona closed her eyes, remembering that awful fight. Her 17-year-old self had been so black and white, so ready to condemn him as a liar without hearing the full story. Well, I'm listening now, she said. Her dad ran a hand through his graying hair.
I know you don't believe me, but I did see something that first night at the B&B. Maybe it was Isabel, maybe it was just shadows and wishful thinking. But it got me curious enough to start digging. But the last name Munson didn't have the same romantic ring as Chevalier, you know? And some of the details, well, let's say I embellished some of them for marketing purposes.
He had the grace to look embarrassed. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, years of misunderstanding slowly untangling between them.
I'm sorry I gave you reason not to trust me in the first place. Running a B&B based on a ghost story meant walking a thin line between history and entertainment. I, maybe lost sight of that line sometimes.
Leona's throat burned with unshed tears. Dad?
Yeah, kiddo?
When you get home, I'd love for you to tell me more about those early days at the B&B. He smiled, the expression crinkling his eyes in the way that had always made her feel safe as a child. After they said goodbye, Leona sat holding her silent phone, staring at the black screen until it became a mirror reflecting her own uncertain face back at her. She thought about Dennis, about the careful way he'd steadied her when she'd broken down on the steamboat, how he'd owned up to planting the camera, even knowing it would destroy whatever was growing between them. Her father's words echoed, Sometimes the person worth fighting for is the one who owns up to their mistakes. But was owning up enough? She'd meant what she said about not being able to trust him. Trust, once broken, didn't simply mend itself with good intentions and apologies. Then again, without Dennis, Caroline would likely still be stealing from her, and she'd be on track to lose the B&B. Leona set the phone aside and walked to her window, looking across the courtyard toward the main house where Dennis had stayed. She touched the glass, her fingertips leaving small prints on the cool surface. Part of her wanted to call him right now, to hear his voice, and see if that spark was still there. But the logical part of her mind warned her against risking that kind of vulnerability again. The truth was messier than her father's simple advice suggested. Some mistakes could be forgiven. Some people were worth fighting for. But figuring out which was which, that was for Leona to puzzle out on her own. Chapter 13. Dennis sat at his desk in Baton Rouge, cursor blinking on an unfinished video timeline that had been open for 3 hours. The same clip of an old cemetery gate played on loop while his mind wandered. He rubbed his face and forced himself to focus on the footage. But when the clip ended, he found himself reaching for his phone to scroll through the Chevalier House website. The About Us page featured a photo of Leona, her smile bright as she stood in front of the inn's wrought iron gates. He'd memorized every pixel by now. Was she smiling like that these days? Or had the stress of Caroline's betrayal worn her down? His editing software chimed with an autosave notification, snapping him back to reality. 2 months since he'd checked out of the B&B with his tail between his legs, and he was still opening his laptop each morning with the foolish hope that maybe today he'd find an email from her. Dennis closed the file he was working on and brought up his video on the lady in blue. He'd finished it a week ago. It wasn't the typical ghost hunt he'd first imagined. Instead, it had taken on a quieter, documentary feel as he wove in the true story of the woman doing her best to save her family's B&B. It was better than he expected. Tuesday was supposed to be his upload day. His subscribers expected new content, and the Lady in Blue episode was polished and ready. But every time Dennis hovered his cursor over the publish button, he froze. This wasn't just his story to tell. Instead, he spent Monday night frantically editing together a half-baked video about a supposedly haunted lighthouse in Alabama, something he'd filmed months ago as backup content. It was mediocre at best. But he'd managed to publish it in time. He wanted Leona's blessing to post the video, which was something Dennis very much doubted he'd get. He drafted and redrafted about a dozen emails to her and sent none. As Dennis stared blankly at the screen, he finally admitted the truth to himself. He wasn't just trying to ask for permission to post his video. He was looking for an excuse to reach out to her. Any excuse. He typed quickly before he could second-guess himself. I won't post this unless you want me to. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after I violated your trust and privacy. I completely understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I couldn't bring myself to share this story without your permission. It belongs to you and your family more than it ever belonged to me, and I should have respected that from the beginning. I've been sitting here for weeks, trying to find the right words to tell you how sorry I am, and nothing feels adequate. The truth is, I miss you. I miss the way you light up when you talk about the B&B. I miss the moment by the creek when you asked me to try for something real between us. I can't remember the last time I felt as happy as I did in that moment, like everything in my life had finally clicked into place. I know I threw all of that away with my deception, and I know this email is probably just me being selfish, reaching out when you probably want to be left alone. If you want me to delete the video and never contact you again, I will. Whatever you need. He attached the unpublished video, hit send before his courage could fail him, then sat back in his chair, bracing for silence, or worse. Instead, her reply came within the hour. It was brief and professional, but not cold. A local reporter had gotten wind of the scandal and Caroline's arrest. They wanted to interview Leona about the embezzlement and the B&B's survival. The reporter also wanted Dennis to be part of the interview, since he had helped expose the truth. "Come back to New Orleans," she wrote. "We can discuss the video then." 2 weeks later, Dennis drove south with sweaty palms and a speech rehearsed in his head. He'd imagined their reunion the entire drive. Maybe they'd have a quiet moment on the veranda, or she'd invite him to the carriage house for coffee, somewhere private where he could properly apologize. Reality, as usual, had other plans. When he pulled into the Chevalier House lot, a news van was already there, along with what looked like half the staff bustling around the courtyard. Agatha directed a crew member carrying equipment toward the main house, impatiently pushing a lock of her graying red hair out of her face. Dennis headed for the front entrance, hoping to catch Leona before things got too hectic. Flora intercepted him. "Dennis, we're running a little behind schedule. Can you head straight to the parlor? They're going to do a quick sound check." Actually, I was hoping to speak with," Dennis began, but Flora was already shepherding him inside. "Leona's just talking to Toby. She'll be over in a minute," said Flora, as Dennis caught a glimpse of Leona through the office doorway, looking every bit as beautiful as he remembered. Their eyes met for just a moment. She gave him a polite nod before turning back to Toby. His chest tightened. So much for his imagined reunion. The next few minutes passed in a blur of lighting adjustments and microphone tests. Dennis found himself positioned across from a sharp-looking reporter who introduced herself as Elena Hawke. When Leona finally entered the parlor, she was every inch the composed business owner, hair perfectly styled, wearing a navy blazer that brought out her blue eyes. She shook hands with the reporter and the videographer before settling into her chair with professional grace. She was just close enough for Dennis to catch her perfume, some type of floral-forward vanilla scent. "Hi, Dennis," she said as she clipped on her microphone. "Thank you for coming down." "Of course," he managed, suddenly tongue-tied. "You look, the B&B looks great." And then the cameras were rolling, and any chance for real conversation disappeared. Dennis found himself stealing glances at Leona when he should have been focusing on the reporter's questions. Afterward, as the news crew packed up their equipment, Dennis lingered in the lobby, unsure if he should approach Leona or give her space. She was thanking the reporter, every inch the gracious hostess, but he caught her glancing his way once or twice. When the news crew finally left, she walked over to where he stood by the front desk. "So," she said, her tone businesslike but not unfriendly, "about the video." Dennis straightened, trying to read her expression. "Right. I meant what I said in the email. I won't post it without your permission." "I watched it," she said simply. "It's well done. You told Isabel's story with respect and—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "You were fair to the B&B, and to me." Relief flooded through him. "I'd like you to release it. You see, Caroline blew through a lot of the money she stole, and it's pretty unlikely she'll be paying us back much. I've still got to dig the B&B out of this financial mess, and honestly, I need all the free marketing I can get." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but he could hear the underlying strain. "We've actually got a Halloween party coming up. About 50 folks have bought tickets, but I'm worried interest will die down after Halloween." Dennis nodded. "Then I'll post it the day of the news release." Leona met his eyes for the first time since the cameras had stopped rolling. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he saw a flash of fondness underneath. Then it was gone. "Thank you for asking my permission," she said. That meant a lot. An awkward silence stretched between them. Dennis opened his mouth to begin the apology he'd carefully crafted on the car ride to New Orleans, but Leona was already turning away. "I should check on the evening guests," she said. "Thanks for coming down." It was a dismissal, gentle but clear. Dennis nodded and watched her go, his prepared speech dying in his throat. Chapter 14. The invitation had arrived 2 days later. Leona's email was short. The staff is planning to watch the new segment together when it airs. Thought you might want to join us. Also, since you'll be down here the night before Halloween anyway, I thought if you're free, you should stay for the Halloween party the next evening. Consider it 2 nights on the house as a thank you for your help uncovering everything with Caroline. Dennis read it twice before believing it was real. She hadn't said anything about them, nothing about forgiveness or second chances. This was probably just an olive branch, a peace offering of friendship. Still, his chest thudded as he typed back his acceptance. By the time he pulled into the B&B lot the evening of the news segment, his Lady in Blue video had been live since that morning. The views were climbing steadily, better than he'd expected. The B&B glowed warm against the October dusk, carved pumpkins flanking the entrance, and autumn wreaths adorning the doors. Leona greeted him at the door, wearing a cream sweater that brought out the gold in her hair, and when she smiled at him, it reached her eyes for the first time since that afternoon they'd spent at the creek, talking about their future. Just in time, everyone's gathered in the parlor. The staff had claimed the entire room, spreading out across chairs and the sofa with bowls of popcorn and glasses of cider. Agatha commandeered the remote with authority, while Barry and Flora debated whether the reporter would pronounce Chevalier correctly. Toby was sprawled on the floor, stealing handfuls from Flora's popcorn bowl. Dennis settled into an armchair near the window. Leona took the spot on the couch closest to him. He wanted to say something to her, but as he was racking his brains on the what, Agatha began shushing everyone. "Here we go," she said as the news segment began. Dennis found himself watching Leona more than the television. Her expression shifted as the story unfolded. A slight wince when Caroline's mugshot appeared on the screen, which gradually morphed into a look of pride as the story veered into the B&B's history. The segment wrapped with aerial footage of the B&B at sunset, the reporter's voiceover highlighting the Halloween party and upcoming themed events. As the news moved on to the next segment, the room erupted in chatter. "Well, that wasn't terrible," Agatha declared, which from her was high praise. Barry raised his cider glass. "To surviving Caroline and coming out stronger." Everyone toasted, the mood light and celebratory. Dennis felt himself relaxing into the group dynamic. As the evening wound down, Agatha declared it was past her bedtime. "Unlike you young people, I need my beauty sleep for tomorrow's party." "Beauty sleep?" Barry called out. "Angel, you're already perfect." Agatha's retort involved a creative use of kitchen utensils that sent everyone into fits of laughter. One by one, the staff headed home or upstairs, until only Dennis and Leona remained in the parlor. Dennis found himself studying the pattern on the rug, searching for something to say that wouldn't break whatever fragile piece they'd found. "You know, that YouTube video of yours is really well done," Leona said, finally. "I watched it 3 times before I emailed you, you know." 3 times? "Yeah, I kept looking for something to be angry about, if I'm being honest. Some way you'd sensationalized things or made me look foolish. And you didn't," she said, meeting his eyes. She looked at him for a long moment before she seemed to catch herself. "I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Dennis nodded, standing as she did. "Right, big party." The next evening, Dennis stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the black tunic of his costume one more time. The plastic sword at his hip felt ridiculous, but he'd committed to the theme. Through his window, he could see guests arriving in elaborate costumes, the courtyard strung with orange lights and filled with the warm glow of jack-o'-lanterns. Music drifted up from the garden, where Toby had set up a small dance floor beside the catered buffet. By the time he finally made his way to the garden, the party was in full swing. A vampire chatted with a witch by the punch bowl, while a group of American revolutionaries debated the merits of different cocktail recipes. Then he saw her. Leona stepped out of the B&B's back door, and Dennis forgot how to breathe. She wore a sapphire blue gown that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, the fabric flowing around her as she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style, with a few golden curls framing her face. She was the lady in blue come to life, and she was absolutely radiant. She scanned the crowd, her eyes finding his across the garden. Her smile was soft, perhaps a little shy, as she made her way toward him. "Wesley from The Princess Bride?" Leona asked. Dennis nodded, and her smile widened. "Well, I've got a hankering for some punch. Care to join me?" "As you wish," he said, which earned him an affectionate eye roll from Leona as she led him toward refreshments. "Thought Toby would be bartending tonight," said Dennis as a friendly server poured 2 glasses of punch for them. "I gave the whole crew the night off so they could enjoy the party. They're all here somewhere. Figured they deserved something fun after the craziness of the past few months." Dennis nodded, his eyes trailing to the dance floor where Barry, dressed as a pirate, was dancing closely with an older woman in a masquerade mask, faded red hair pulled into a tight bun. Leona seemed to notice Dennis eyeing the dancing couples. She studied his face for a moment, then slowly set down her glass on a nearby cocktail table. Without a word, she extended her hand toward him, palm up, her eyes holding a gentle question. When Dennis took her hand, she smiled and led him toward the makeshift dance floor. The party flowed around them as other couples continued their gentle movements, but Dennis found himself aware of only Leona as he rested his hand on her waist, the soft fabric of her dress warm beneath his palm. "I owe you a bit of an apology," she said. "Leona, no. Let me finish. I was hurt and angry when I found out about the hidden camera, and frankly, I had every right to be. But I also said horrible things to you. It was uncalled for." Dennis winced, remembering his last day at the B&B. After discovering Caroline's betrayal, Leona had gone stony. He'd expected tears like when she'd thought Toby had been stealing from her. Instead, Leona sat, unmoving, in a tense silence for almost a full 5 minutes. When Dennis risked speaking to recommend they bring the video to the cops, she exploded at him. It had been the worst tongue-lashing of his life, replete with jabs about being a failed wannabe YouTube star. She hadn't spoken to him for the rest of his stay, despite his several attempts at apologizing. Leona had barely even looked at him as he checked out of the B&B, not even as he handed her an envelope containing the SD card with the video evidence she needed. The look she gave him now held none of that cold fury. "You came clean when you didn't have to, Dennis. You could have just deleted the footage and never told me the truth." Dennis swallowed hard. "I couldn't live with myself if I'd done that." "I know." She lifted her hand to touch his cheek. The song ended, but neither of them pulled away. The garden seemed to have grown quieter around them, other conversations fading to a murmur. "I'm feeling a little hot. Do you want to walk with me?" Leona asked, gesturing toward the path that led around the B&B. They wandered away from the party, their footsteps soft on the crushed shell path. Her hand gently brushed his as they meandered. The faint light from the moon, combined with the Edison bulb strung up around the front of the B&B, shone along her hair, and Dennis realized he couldn't take another step, not without understanding what this newfound truce between them really held. He took her hand and gently brought them to a stop. "Leona, I'm grateful you invited me here this weekend, and I'm probably about to stick my foot in my mouth. And really, if you want to be friends with me, that's fine. Being just friends is totally fine. Like, I respect you and your feelings, and I'm not going to push for anything, but I..." Leona put him out of his misery and leaned in to kiss him, her arms winding around his neck. After a moment, she pulled away, drawing her hands up to cup his face, thumbs rubbing softly on his cheeks.
"I missed you,"
Dennis said, the words barely above a whisper.
"I missed you too."
Her voice was equally soft.
"More than I wanted to admit."
"Maybe we could," Dennis started, then stopped, afraid to push too hard.
"Try again?"
Leona finished. "I'd like that, if you would."
"So what happens now?"
Leona smiled. "Well, tomorrow we figure it out together. But now you kiss me." And Dennis did. It was a kiss full of the promise of second chances and new beginnings. He leaned back and nuzzled her nose, drawing a laugh from her as she pulled him back and kissed him with fervor. Above them, in the third-floor window of the inn, a woman's figure bathed in blue light watched from behind lace curtains and smiled.